Hi there, I'm Claudia Hosky from FedInsider, and on behalf of the George Washington University College of Professional Studies, Carasoft, Okta, Ridge IT Cyber, and Zscaler, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, CMMC 2.0, What DoD Contractors Need to Know. Please type your questions and comments into the Q&A pod on the left side of the screen. If we don't get to your questions today, we'll share them with our speakers so they can follow up with you. Also, take note of the Resources tab on the left side as well to download today's slides and other reading materials on the topic. We offer live captioning for all of our webinars. To follow along with us, use the hyperlink under the Live Captioning or CART tab located above the slides. We'll have the full transcript available in the next day or two. And to earn training credit for today's webinar, you'll have to answer all polling questions and stay online for the duration of today's conversation. And now, let me turn over the reins to our moderator, John Breeden from FedInsider. Take it away, John.
Thank you so much, Claudia. And hello, everybody. Hello, my friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm John Breeden, and today I'll be moderating what I know is going to be a very lively discussion about a really interesting and also a critical topic, and that is the new Cybersecurity Model Certification 2.0 in DoD, and what that means for contractors and others who need to conduct business or otherwise interact with the Department of Defense. Now, the rule rolls out some new security requirements in 4 phases over the course of 3 years, setting cybersecurity standards at progressively advanced levels, depending on the type of sensitivity of information held by each contractor. And it charges the DoD with verifying implementation of those cybersecurity requirements. We're going to talk about all of that on today's show, including things like how it dovetails into federal zero trust mandates and identity and access management initiatives. I'm really excited to get the show started. I love these really technical shows. I know you all are as well. So let's meet our talented speakers that we're going to be talking with today. First off, let me welcome Dr. Alan Dinerman, the Senior Manager for Cyber Strategy, Policy, and Privacy for MITRE. Alan, it's a real honor to have you on the show with us today. Thank you for joining us and welcome.
Thank you.
We also have Jeff Adorno. He is the Field Chief Compliance Officer with Zscaler. Jeff, we're so happy you're here with us today, and we're really looking forward to talking with you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Happy to be here.
Great. We also have another well-known expert in this field joining us today. Sean Fraser is the Federal Chief Security Officer with Okta. Sean, it's a real honor to have you with us. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too, as well. And we're also fortunate to have one more really well-known expert on cybersecurity on the panel with us today. Chad Koslow is the CEO of Ridge IT Cyber. Chad, I know how busy you are, so thank you so much for taking the time to talk with our audience today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, John.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. We have a lot of really interesting items on the agenda to talk about today. This is really a fascinating topic. I mean, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification 2.0 brings a lot of changes for those working with the DoD, not the least of which is moving from a self-assessment footing to a pretty strict auditing standard. And we will talk about all of that with our guests today. But as I mentioned, all of our guests have really interesting backgrounds as well. It really makes them kind of the top experts in their field to talk about this topic. So let's just take a quick moment to learn a little bit more about the folks that we're going to be spending the next hour with. So Alan, let's start with you. Now, you are the Senior Manager for Cyber Strategy, Policy, and Privacy for MITRE. Sounds like a really fascinating job, but also a comprehensive one. We're really glad you could join us today. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about your extensive history in government service and also technology?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So let me preface with, I'm not this MITRE senior manager for all of that stuff. I lead an organization in MITRE that focuses on that kind of stuff. A subtle but a very real distinction. So yeah, I started off as an Army officer, and my initial focus was on information network architecture and network management and things of that nature. And it ultimately shifted to cyber and cybersecurity within DoD, while I was in the Army, I had the opportunity to attend the DoD's College of Information and Cyber, where I earned the DoD CISO certificate, and I worked a bunch of cyber assignments. Ultimately, my Army run culminated with an assignment at U.S. Cyber Command. After that, I came over to MITRE. Like I said, where I'm not the MITRE senior manager for such. I lead an organization that contributes directly to cyber privacy, data protection, policy, strategy, and governance projects. And I lead an organization that sort of seeks to innovate ways to do that and delves in that kind of space.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And what a fascinating background. And Alan, could you also tell us just a little bit about MITRE? I mean, it's really unique the way that organization is structured. And I just want to make sure everyone in the audience understands that.
Yeah, thanks. MITRE is a not-for-profit organization that operates and manages federally funded research and development centers. And so we typically work with various government departments and agencies to do systems engineering and policy analysis and capability development. Cyber is but one of many technical domains that we wade into. And so to that end, we have organizations that are directly aligned with our sponsors. And then we have this backplane of technical expertise and organizations that sort of support and build capabilities for these front-facing organizations. And that's where I land. And like I said, my organization focuses particularly on cybersecurity and privacy policy and strategy, risk management, things like that. I think pertinently to this panel is that because our mission is to operate in the public interest, we strive to be a multi-sector connector and help facilitate knowledge transfer between government and private sector. And so to that end, I'm really glad to be invited today. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we're definitely glad you're here. And Jeff, thank you for being here as well. I know you're an extremely technical guy. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about some of the technology work that you do and also some of the things you do today as the Field Chief Compliance Officer for Zscaler?
Thanks, John. Flattery will get you everywhere. I need to send you like a box of donuts or something for that. So team, happy to be here. Jeffrey Adorno, Field Compliance Officer for Zscaler. Before I was with Zscaler, I spent 21 years in the military supporting, from an IT perspective, cyber background, supporting, a range of customers from infantry to the NSA to Secretary of Defense, and then I retired with Special Operations. If I could tie one line through all of that is we normally did more with less, and sometimes you had to get creative. Here at Zscaler, what my role entails is not only being a customer-facing resource, guiding and being a risk officer, compliance officer for the customer, but also guiding them to see how you can align the Zscaler technologies against a buttload of compliance frameworks. So that can range from HIPAA to PCI DSS to Zero Trust and now CMMC. Thank you.
Oh, no, excellent. Great background. Thank you, Jeff. I have a lot of great questions for you. And Sean, it's a really great honor to have you on the show with us as well. Now, you're the Federal Chief Security Officer with Okta. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, your impressive career, and some of the things you get to work on today with your federal customers?
Yeah, I don't know how impressive my career is. It's very long, though. So when I started working in cybersecurity, it wasn't called cybersecurity. And you can tell by this gray beard that I've been doing this for a long time. My career started deploying email systems in Department of Defense before email was a thing. I went from there to a company called Netscape doing internet stuff back in the day. And that's when the DoD decided they want to get on the internet. So that was pretty fun. Followed Mark Andreessen to LoudCloud, being the very first cloud company when cloud was not cool. Was definitely not cool back then, but it was a lot of fun because I learned a ton about cloud and what we should do. And then here I am at Okta having the same conversations around identity being important to Zero Trust and all the things that we're doing. And my through line is pretty much modernization of everything. So bring all these technologies to bear to modernize, warfighters, to modernize enterprise, whatever those kinds of things are. So I'm a total nerd and a geek when it comes to applying cool stuff to modernize and do things securely.
That's awesome, Sean. And the one thing I disagree with you on, that is a very impressive background. So thank you for being here. And Chad, I know that Ridge IT Cyber does some amazing work in this field. And as the CEO, you must be extremely busy. So we appreciate you making the time to talk with us and our audience today. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and some of the things that you're most proud on to work on these days with your public sector customers?
Yeah, absolutely, John. A little bit about me. I got involved in the intelligence community after 9/11. Did that for about a decade, and then from there took a lot of skills and knowledge sets I had, helped found Rich IT Cyber, and then I'd say about 9 years ago, Congress passed FISMA, the Federal Information Modernization Act, which I like to look at it as it's the CMMC for federal agencies. So we were involved in audit remediations, helping agencies be compliant with NIST 853, which is the government standard. And then from CMMC, we have NIST 800-171. So about 10 years ago, we really got to work with agencies, approve it, see from an auditor's perspective, and really support an agency maturing their cybersecurity program. And then actually this month of all things, 5 years supporting CMMC since it's been in the draft form. We signed some of our first DIB customers this month 5 years ago. And outside of that, we're working inside the DoD, implementing DoD zero trust controls for multiple DoD branches. And commercially, globally, we've done over 1,000 zero trust related projects. So really excited to talk about this and security compliance and everything else. So thanks for having me again.
Awesome. Wow. What a great group of people with some amazing backgrounds. I'm sure our audience appreciates having such experienced guests to talk about this topic today. So let's get into it. Now, as I mentioned in the introduction, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification 2.0 really changes a lot of things for those working with the Department of Defense. As such, I'd like to kind of level set things for our audience so that everyone's on the same page about what that really means. And then we can dive into some of the deeper aspects of it, like the challenges and also some of the solutions for making this work. Now, Alan, I'd like to start with you in this section, since I know you study this issue quite a bit, to help kind of level set things for our audience. Can you first explain what the Cybersecurity Model Certification, or CMMC, program actually is in the Department of Defense, what it's designed to do, and what it actually mandates?
Yeah. So for quite a while, participants, members of the DIB, have been required to implement NIST Special Publication 800-171 requirements and their associated controls and protection of CUI. In the past, there was little differentiation between which of these requirements various companies needed to implement, and companies were able to self-attest to implementation of these requirements. These two areas are particularly where the CMMC significantly changes the landscape. As most of you know, CMMC 2.0 establishes 3 levels of certification that align with escalating requirements for cybersecurity implementation that's based on the sensitivity of the data that the DIB member of the company works with. Level 1 certification is required when a company only works with FCI and doesn't work with CUI information. It still sort of allows for annual self-assessment and annual affirmation of compliance with the 15 security requirements in the FAR clause 52-204-21. Levels 2 and 3 is where things get interesting and different. Level 2 certification requires implementation of 110 cybersecurity requirements in NIST Special Publication 800-171 Revision 2. But it also requires, in addition to an annual self-assessment and affirmation, it also requires a C3PAO external assessment every 3 years. Of note, the external assessment for level 2 is conducted by a certified private sector auditor. Level 3, similar, but a little bit different. Level 3 certification requires the same 171 R2 requirements as level 2, but it also includes implementation of 24 selected requirements from NIST Special Publication 800-172. Once again, companies seeking level 3 certification annually self-attest and self-assess that they're meeting these requirements, but these companies must undergo an external assessment every 3 years by the Defense Contract Management Agency's Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center, DIBCAC. NIST Special Publication 800-171 R2 provides the requirements for level 2, and like I just said, the bulk of the requirements for level 3. NIST Special Publication 800-171A provides the blueprint for how assessors should conduct audits. And this is sort of useful because it gets the auditor and the auditee on the same sheet of music, and everyone sort of generally understands how these assessments will play out. Now, all this kind of information is pretty publicly available on DoD CMMC websites. I think, in conclusion for this question, I think the big takeaway is that 171R2 tells you what you have to do. 171A tells you how you're going to be assessed, but there's no real stipulation as to how you implement these requirements. There's no required implementation, architecture, or solutions. There's lots of good ways to satisfy the cybersecurity requirements, and I'm pretty sure some of my colleagues in the panel are going to talk about some broader conceptual and tools approaches that can help.
Yeah, no, excellent, Alan. Thank you so much for level setting things. I think that was really perfect. Now, Sean, one of the things that Alan was saying was that with 2.0, you have these external audits that have to happen. For those audits that Alan kind of talked about as a new requirement for 2.0, what is that going to be like for most contractors, and what will that look like, and how will that be different from their self-assessment?
So it'll be done by an auditor, so that'll be a big difference. Hopefully they're not scared of audits, and they've been doing audits in other aspects of their business, so there's nothing really to be frightened with that. I look at audits a specific way, and this is coming from my perspective, working in cloud computing for the last 10 years, where we do FedRAMP, so we're audited every year for FedRAMP. We've been IL4, had our IL4 implementation about 2 or 3 years now, so we've been audited for IL4, and IL4 is the DoD SRG Secure Cloud audit that we go through. And to me, and what I always communicate to my teams is that you don't let the tail wag the dog. So you don't do the audit to tell you what you're supposed to do from a security perspective. You do the security things, and the audit gives you the thumbs up saying you're doing all the right things. So as long as you're kind of looking at this the right way, and knowing that none of this happens in a vacuum, the things you're looking at from a security perspective, and Alan talked about the 171 and 172 requirements that folks have been doing already. A lot of this ties back to 853, which is a set of controls around data protection and system protection and all these things that you're doing. That's our Bible. We live by that. We in the cloud world and FedRAMP live by that. So as long as you're paying attention to the fundamentals of security, and you're paying attention from the perspective of data, because that's the other important thing that people miss, is they look at systems and they look at controls, but they're not always looking at the data. And at the end of the day, it's all about that. It's all about the kind of data that goes into your system, what's processed, what's stored, what's moved. And as long as you have a fundamental understanding of what those things are and where the data lands and where it's moving, and you can kind of count to that, and you can point your auditors to your protection controls you have around that, you will be golden. But focus on that, fundamentals. It's all about the data.
Excellent. Wow, great advice, Sean. Thank you. It sounds like you've been through this a few times. That's
yeah, a lot. I've been through this a lot.
Excellent. Well, we're glad you're able to share your wisdom with our audience today. Now, Chad, I know from talking with you before the show, you were telling me that you're already in the process of doing some of the pre-auditing work with a lot of your customers. In general, do you have clients or do you think there are people maybe in the audience today might be in a situation where maybe they think they're in great shape for CMMC 2.0 based on their self-assessments, but then they discover that there might be areas where there are, without at least putting in some critical work, maybe they're not going to score quite so highly when it comes to the DoD audit?
Yeah, I see it all the time, especially when we started out early. We were getting customers that were like, we just need this one area of protection. We're scoring a 90, 95, all the way up to 110, which is a perfect score. And then the second we work with them, we're like, well, let's go through a little mock audit, very quickly over a couple hours. We start to pull out tiny threads. And at the end of the day, they settle into the mid 60s, maybe the very low 70 scores. And it's a really big wake up call. When we do proposals, as did contractors, often we have red team reviews of, hey, let's double check our work, a sanity check by a third party not involved in it. And the second you do, you really notice someone could slowly pick out your perfect plan, and then you realize I'm not as protected and not as compliant as I think I am.
what are some of the key areas that kind of trip folks up? I mean, it seems like if they're going from 110% to 60, it seems like there might be a lot of little things in there. What are some of the areas that that maybe kind of are common mistakes that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, so the first one is, the fortunate and unfortunate part about NIST and CMMC is they don't tell you how to do it. They tell you what you need to do. They tell you the intent of the controls, and then they give you that flexibility to build your business model, your security model around meeting the intent of these controls. So often, they look at it and they're like, okay, I have MFA across my system. Look, and when you go through an audit, they show MFA logging into Office 365 or something else. And you're like, well, what about at desktop login? And they're like, oh, I didn't really think of that as a system. And so you constantly look at stuff of, oh, we have a change control process. Okay, tell me about it. And then you find out it's very ad hoc. Hey, the director says this, the CEO says this, we talk about it and then we do it. So you're missing that formality, that repeatable process that shows that you're actually following a set of processes that meet the intent of control. And I could go on. There's like so many small little death by 1,000 paper cuts that at the end of it, you're left a little more exposed and a lot of catch up work.
Yeah, no, interesting. I bet that's real interesting doing those pre-assessments. Jeff, thank you for being here as well. I know how technical you are and on shows like this. Now, in terms of compliance with the new regulations, we've already talked about some of the top level things that people need to be concerned about. And Chad was talking a little bit about some of the interesting ways that people kind of get tripped up a little bit. I know you get to look at this a lot. From your perspective, are there also some subtle or maybe more nuanced concerns? Are there areas that contractors want to make sure they shouldn't miss when they're getting ready for that for their first audit? I think you might be muted, Jeff.
That happened to me twice today. Jeez. For me, CMMC is it's a hydra. So there's a business perspective, there's a compliance, cybersecurity, there's a legal contractual obligation. So from different standpoints, I would first say one of the nuances or constraints is really socializing with the business that you are going to be impacted, but also relating to the business that CMMC is actually a catalyst for a conversation of transformation, right? Now we have a mandate, now we have a carrot and a stick. How can we leverage this to start to change how we do business? I was thinking about this webinar, and there's a guy named John Gall. He has a quote that says, "Complex systems evolved from simple systems, not in reverse." Right? And right now, because of the legacy way we used to do things from hardware and types of architectures, we then start to think, well, CMMC can be just the same way, and now we're just going to layer on a new architecture over an old one when we could just clean up everything and let's start to modernize. To that end, you're going to hear me, whenever I get some type of pulpit, is the keyword words: operational flexibility. How can we enable whoever's going to be our CMMC users and the business to have that operational flexibility? How can we have incorporate a technology to empower everybody along the value chain, from operations to, operations all the way to the executive level? So one of the technologies that could do that is, you're going to see it more and more evolving, is browser isolation. So with browser isolation, is going to provide you a pixelated view of that the web page or resource, so that it's not downloading or allowing that endpoint to have access to that resource, that malware-ridden internet, the dirty internet. But also from a CMMC perspective, it allows you to de-scope the endpoint. Now we're shrinking the assessment boundary, right? And just along with that is looking forward. First it was, I'll say, CMMC or zero trust, then it was CMMC, and now currently it's AI, right? So AI is the buzzword. So instead of being fear-mongering and saying we can't use it, we need to use modern tools to be able to use modern tools.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I like the browser isolation. That's a great, very specific suggestion. So thank you for that.
So I think before you get going, what Jeff was saying, I think one of the things that the audit will really help with is, and for folks that are kind of inundated by all the different compliance regimes that are out there, is the crosswalking of all of those different compliance regimes. One of the challenges is, and a good example is, and Jeff brought up, hey, multi-factor authentication. That's by the letter of the law must have multi-factor authentication. There's a bunch of other guidance in the world like M2209 and M1917 from years ago that says it must be phishing resistant authentication. So if you don't know that and you're self-assessing, you may say, well, I'll just do an SMS-based, authentication and I'm good and I'm checking the box. But you're not good because there's crosswalking to other guidance and other requirements that you have that aren't taken into account. Whereas the 3PAL or an auditor will come in and go, yeah, that's not going to meet the letter of the law. We're going to have to assess this differently. And I'm going to tell you what all these other things mean. So that crosswalk is really important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's amazing. You guys really know your stuff. Thank you so much. I'm sure our audience really appreciates what's going on today. In our audience, by the way, if you have any specific questions, I mean, these are really the experts on CMMC 2.0. Please submit any questions you might have. I see some of you already are. We'll definitely try to get to some of them live on the show today, but if we can't, we are going to round them up and send them to our speakers afterwards. So this is a really great chance to get those questions coming in. I look forward to hearing from everybody. Okay, so now that everybody's kind of on the same page, let's talk about some of the challenges regarding CMMC 2.0 compliance. Sean, let me start with you. Now, you sort of mentioned this a little bit with the crosswalking, but the CMMC, the 2.0 plan is to have it implemented, I believe Alan was saying, in 4 phases over like 3 years. And he was saying it was based on the amount of FCI or federal contract information and also CUI or controlled and classified information that a contractor controls. What's the difference between FCI and CUI, and how can contractors kind of decide how much of that they hold and what level of auditing they're going to be subjected to?
Yeah, so federal contract data is data that they won't normally or necessarily have to share out to anybody. So they kind of keep that close hold to the contractor and it deals with the contracts that they work on. And then CUI is controlled and classified data. So it's stuff that's controlled, must have a protection around it, must have a protective designation, but it's not classified. So it doesn't meet NSS. You have to treat them all, as important. They're all important in their own ways, right? Any system that you have, whether it be a database or whether it be an application that stores this data, has to be kind of assessed at the level of that data. And a good example in my world, again, if I think about the DoD SRG, is that we have impact levels that we assess to. We have all the way from IL2, and we jump over IL3 that doesn't exist anymore, and we got IL4 and IL5 and IL6. So these impact levels all kind of determined, they're based upon data. So the type of data that you store in these systems gives you the designation of that system impact level. So everyone has to pay very close attention to this because what CMMC is going to do is it's going to look at any system, whether it be on-prem or be in the cloud, that moves data, stores data, processes data. And you're going to have to know what that is. So you as the system owner cannot abdicate any responsibility of the data and how the data is protected. So one of the things that challenges folks is that they tend to think of a system as being the most important thing. This is an IL5 system, and it must be IL5 CUI data. And whatever I put in there, I'm going to treat IL5, but it might not be IL5 data. So you're kind of hurting yourself by doing that because you might only be FOUO, or it might be IL2 level data that you really don't care about. And that could be the contract system that lives over here, but yet you put it under the bubble of much higher assurance. So what you really have to do is you have to know thy data and know where it lives and know how you're protecting it.
Excellent.
I'll jump in and say I love that know thy data, because when I speak across higher education and the defense industrial base at large, ITAR, right? So we talk about CUI, but we don't also talk about ITAR. There's some overlap there, but for some reason it doesn't get added to the conversation unless you have intentionally ask about it. And that allows us at Zscaler to kind of right size the technology to the data criticality.
Yeah, no, excellent, Jeff. Thank you so much. Now, Chad, what everybody's saying so far makes a lot of sense to me. I'm getting the impression that kind of, based on what Sean was saying, regardless of the FCI and CUI levels, that this auditing process and getting ready for it, it's going to be something that's not going to be done or able to be done quickly for most companies. In terms of the timelines, when you're working with your folks for this, and for those listening in today who really need to get ready and prepare, where's the best place to get started, and how long should they kind of allot for this whole process?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Great question. So, unfortunately, it's not all one size fits all. If you look at CMMC level one, like I would honestly say, if you look at the intent of those controls, that is, I desire to have a business that will remain open the very next day. Like the controls are so minimum and basic that I'm willing to bet you're doing 95% of those. And the small amount that you're not doing within those 15 controls, you should really look at implementing that regardless of whether you're going to stay in the DIB. It just ensures you have a business to come back to. That you can do fairly quickly because, again, the fact that you have an IT system, you're probably doing a lot of those. Now we get into the technicalities, and I won't address CMMC level 3 because if you need to be CMMC level 3, you knew that like 3-4 years ago and you've been working. So the vast majority of us are going to fall into CMMC level 2 and handling CUI or CUI. And that's a journey. We could get that done. Technology aspect of it, 6 months to a year, but what you're really looking to do and what they're looking for is that you've adopted cybersecurity as part of your company culture and you've communicated it and you've been able to like repeat that over and over again. So, look at what type of system you're going to have. Are you going to have a private enclave? Are you going to try to certify the whole environment? And then when you're on this journey, start helping yourself for your audit early, start collecting. Those artifacts are proof to an auditor that you're doing it. Build a folder under each control, take those screenshots, put this in, build this record. So when it comes time to meet with an auditor, you're like, look, my company isn't ever going to be perfect, but look, here is a record in this journey of us constantly improving our security posture. Here's our screenshots that I can prove that, hey, we were doing this 6 months ago. It wasn't great. It wasn't perfect. But look, every single month we're making measurable improvements, or at least you could say we're consistently implemented. So those are a couple things that you can jump into right now, but it's really ingrained it into the company. It is going to take time.
Yeah, no, wow. Great advice on how to get started, Chad. I really appreciate that and providing that kind of roadmap as to some concrete things that people can do to start getting ready. I really appreciate that. I'm sure our audience does as well. Now, Alan, back over to you. The CMMC 2.0 standard, it does not specifically mention zero trust, and as some of our other guests have mentioned, it's kind of the standards are kind of a little nebulous in some places. Could you explain how, though, CMMC 2.0 can be supported by zero trust initiatives, as well as by other security programs like identity controls and access management, which is also referred to as ICAM, just in case you decide to use an acronym. But how do you see all of those standards kind of working together? Is that something that maybe people should be working on as a group, or can one support the other? What's that ecosystem look like?
Yeah. Real quickly before I answer that, there's 2 questions I think I can answer pretty quickly from the audience. The first one was, how often are audits conducted? For all levels, we're required to self-assess and self-affirm compliance with the requirements for the various levels annually. And for levels 2 and 3, external audits are required every 3 years. The second question was, are audits focused on technical testing or a process reviews part of the required audit testing? As opposed to directly answering the question, I'll take the easy way out and offer you a reference. Like we've sort of thrown out a lot of sort of different publications. NIST special publication 800-171A fairly expressly details what should be auditors' methods and procedures and approaches to conducting audits. That's also sort of captured in a DoD CMMC audit publication. Forgive me for not remembering the exact title, but the 800-171A is captured in a DoD itself publication too. So you can find those pretty easily and sort of answer your own question. So I took the easy way out, sorry. So real quickly too, I won't take too much more time, but to your question, John, I think your question gets to some of the conversations that we've had earlier, and Sean alluded to this really, really well. And it's that, CMMC provides some fairly specific things that you have to do, requirements, cybersecurity requirements that sort of crosswalk to some to controls and some fairly specific sort of assessment methodologies for auditors. But like we said, it doesn't tell you how to do these things, what concepts to use, what architectures to use. So employing and integrating concepts like zero trust for identity and authentication, or cyber resilience for withstanding of adverse actions. There's a number of solutions that support that, and they're all sort of really good, and sort of integrating these 171 requirements into these greater concepts and approaches can sort of, I think, probably help you optimize how you achieve CMMC requirements. So I hope that helps.
No, it very much did. And thank you so much for answering some of the great audience questions that came in as well, Alan. I really appreciate that. This is a really interesting discussion. I'm learning so much today. I want to get into some of the challenges and also some of the solutions for our audience today. And Jeff, I want to go to you next then. You had mentioned before how the new 2.0 standards are kind of, it's technology and it's also business. It sounds like there's a lot going on. So I wondered if you might know what kinds of tools you might recommend to help both get technology and business processes kind of ready for this change. There must be some things out there that can help people to get ready for this.
Well, double checking if I'm on mute again. I alluded to the first one is browser isolation. Again, it's going to descope some of your endpoints. It's going to allow you to reach some websites that are maybe questionable, or maybe you're doing some research and development. Also, I was talking about AI, right? We want to be able to use AI, but then protect ourselves and our company and proprietary information from being leaked into the AI. So how can you ensure that you're understanding that your workforce is what they're using, when they're using it, what prompts are they starting to load into the AI, but also are they copying, pasting any type of data? Along with that is, how can you ensure that you're not weighing down your network? So if you, that's why I'm just a champion and a fan of a SASE product. It's a lot of capabilities baked in, and you get a lot of functionality for your money. But also there's less technology bloat and debt that your IT team and even your endpoint is consuming and has to work off of.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I appreciate you bringing up AI because that's an interesting angle for sure. I know that people want to use AI, but then it brings up a lot of elements that definitely need to be thinking about, including, is the AI taking your data and doing something with it? So just thank you for bringing that up, Jeff. I think that's important.
If I could throw out one more thing, is one of the challenges that I was just churning it around is being able to create an environment, but also like a CMMC enclave or an enterprise, but how will that interoperate with your business systems? How will it allow your workforce to easily get to corporate applications versus trying to create two different laptops or two different phones, and now you're carrying a bunch of equipment just to get after the same functionality and requirements that you're used to on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, no, excellent. Great. Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate that. Chad, one of the things I like to do in shows like this, I mean, obviously this is a very highly technical show, but I like to kind of bring the human aspect into it. I mean, we all are humans. We haven't been replaced by Jeff's AI yet. So in terms of 2.0, it seems to me to be kind of advocating a security first culture with people who partner with the DoD. How much of a cultural change is this actually going to be for most companies? And how can they also plan for that alongside of their technical preparations?
Yeah, so that's everyone's mileage is going to vary on that one. I'll tell you from my experience, we hire brilliant people, brilliant engineers, brilliant project managers. And when we implemented CMMC inside of our organization, it wasn't a good fit for them, and they were very upset, and they left. So it could show you have brilliant people, but the security was too much. The extra steps they had to take, they felt it was inefficient. So from my experience, it's a lot more than just hiring genius people inside your organization. You need to have that security mindset when you're bringing them in, because it just takes one person not to follow that policy procedure, and then it just becomes that worm in the apple that unfortunately starts to put the whole organization at risk. And then when I see security as a cultural aspect, I'm very blunt. I'd like to say, hey, get to version 1, and version 1 is going to be your worst version ever. Like there's nowhere to go but up, but at least get to version 1 and start practicing it inside the company, getting feedback from all the brilliant people that are empowering the agency. What can we do better? How can we improve this, and slowly make those iterative changes until it's a culture that aligns with cybersecurity, with CMMC, your mandates, your contractual obligations, but it also allows your business to function.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and that's really interesting that that you might have somebody brilliant who just can't handle the security side of things. I never really thought of it that way. Chad, does that happen somewhat often, unfortunately?
More than I would have thought. Especially initially running it out. I think as more people get used to these standards and wherever they come, it's no one likes change. And they don't like pain, and they see a lot of these things as this extra layer that is. Just think about when we rolled out MFA a decade ago. No one wanted the unsecure SMS, but it was better than nothing. So it just takes a while to build in until we accept it. But yes, I've been surprised, and it's slowly getting better. But just be prepared for it.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Chad. Appreciate that. So, Sean, I thought it was really interesting hearing about the human aspects as the sea change is happening, but I would like to move back to the kind of the technical side of things now. I'm sure our audience would love some help in getting ready for 2.0. Given that, what are some of the key tools that are available from your perspective that make getting ready for 2.0 an audit, and also the transition to like this more secure environment a little easier? And also to overcome some of the specific challenges that we've already talked about. What's available to kind of make this a little easier for our audience today?
Yeah, and it actually dovetails into exactly what Chad was talking about. Is that it's always a balance between user experience and security. And one of the things that we focus on, obviously, Okta is an ICAM company. We are a cloud-based ICAM company. But our CEO talks all the time. Our main tagline is kind of hokey, but he says it's we're here to free every person to use every technology securely. But what that really means is that we have to let people access things. So it has to be usable, has to be good user experience. We only do friction if we need to do friction. We don't add any undue friction. So we kind of live and breathe that. So when we go and talk to our constituents and our partners in the DIB, a lot of it is around, satisfying controls, because we all want to satisfy controls. We all want to pass audits. We want to do all the security things. But a lot of it is around, doing the right security fundamental constructs, but also with that eye towards user experience and usability. A good example of that is we have this technology called FastPass, which is passwordless phishing resistant authentication. So we use it internally, live and die by this stuff. It's a thumbprint, it's a facial ID. I log into everything, it's seamless. And behind the scenes, it's doing a lot of assessment about who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing and all these other things. But I, as a user, don't see that. So it's pretty much frictionless. That leads directly into the conversation about how do we help in this regard? Because one of the things that's going to be really helpful for folks is inheritance, right? You can't boil the ocean. You can't build everything yourself. So you pick partners that have a lot of this stuff kind of baked in. Okta's a good example of that. Everyone in the DIB that I talk to, all my friends who are running these assessments, they say, look, Okta's kind of the easy button for all my identity stuff, all my AC controls, all the other stuff that's kind of happening. When my auditors show up at the door and I say I got Okta, they say, well, you're about 45% done. Because at that point, we've already done a lot of the hard work. We've assessed against the controls. We've got a system security plan that talks about all these different things. And that just makes my partner's job easier.
Excellent. Well, good to hear. Definitely. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate that. Now, Alan, this discussion on CMMC 2.0, it's really fascinating, but it occurs to me that, this is going to be a long process, as you say, over at least 3 years, but eventually CMMC 3.0 is going to get deployed as well. Now, reading one of those books back on my shelf from Abraham Lincoln, I believe that he said that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. And the second best time to plant a tree is right now. So given that, what additional requirements do you think will be included in CMMC 3.0? And is there anything that people should maybe be doing now to make that transition in however many years a little more seamless for themselves?
Yeah, I think I can answer that and simultaneously answer a question or two from the audience. And I won't read the question from the audience, but you know if you asked it, right? So CMMC is a DoD requirement, and so it's it gravitates around 171 171 cybersecurity requirements and this external assessor, and so that is a DoD thing, right? Of note, though, just within the past week or so, the FAR Council published a proposed rule for all of the rest of the federal government imposing new 171R2 based requirements. And so that would, I think you had mentioned that you do some work with DOE as well. That would impact, presumably, the DOE space as well. And so what DoD CMMC cybersecurity requirements stem from NIST 800-171R2. And from what I understand, and I haven't looked at it that closely, but as I understand, the new FAR proposed rule also stems from NIST 800-171R2 requirements. So they do seem to be harmonized. To your question directly, John, is that, I don't particularly, I don't know anything that anyone else doesn't know, but both DoD CMMC and what looks like the new FAR rule proposition are based on NIST 800-171R2. In May, NIST published 800-171R3. So presumably, I don't know, but presumably future iterations of CMMC would sort of look at and consider R3 versus R2, and they're pretty similar, but there's some notable differences. R3 and controls, R3 includes some additional control families like system service acquisitions and supply chain risk management and planning and things like that. So I hope that helps answer your question.
No, it does. And you actually answered another audience member's question where he was asking, should they be using version 2 or version 3? So maybe use version 2, but sort of think about maybe looking at what that version 3 says for the future. So excellent response, Alan. Thank you so much. This has been an amazing discussion. We're kind of on the back end of our time, but we have enough time left that I can ask at least one more question to each of our amazing speakers today before we have to say goodbye. So I'm thankful for that. Sean, it sounds like you and Okta are really doing a lot of great work in helping to get people ready for the big transition to 2.0. I liked what you were saying about some of the tools that you're using there for identity. If people are watching the show today and they're kind of starting to face the ticking clock as they prepare for those DoD audits, do you have any helpful advice for them about how they can start to really achieve some success and make that process go a little bit smoother and maybe not be quite so disruptive to them? Because, I mean, after all, if you think about it, they're going to have to do their normal jobs and the things that they need to do for the DoD at the same time as they're getting ready for this 2.0 compliance.
Yeah, and then again, I think hopefully a lot of people are already a little bit down the journey on zero trust and kind of building out kind of the fundamentals of security, which is largely helpful. If you're already down that path and you're doing that as part of your journey, and if you think of the zero trust pillars, right, you've got identities pillar 1 for a reason. Network access is another pillar. Data and applications are a pillar. So as long as you're kind of aligning your fundamentals around security and those things, you will be ahead of the game. You will be in much better shape. I think that you'll be challenged if you're not doing that. So if you're looking at this as this is a burden to me, I'm going to bring in an auditor. They're going to look at stuff. They're going to give me a report and tell me I got to do a bunch of stuff. At the end of it, you're going to be underwater and you're going to be fairly overwhelmed. So, I mentioned this earlier, don't let the tail wag the dog, work on the security fundamentals, work on those things first, and then bring the auditors in to kind of do that harmonization and the crosswalk across the different control sets that you've got and make sure that that's applying for your CMMC. It's not, any of these things that you go through on an audit, they should not be inundative. They should not be compressing. They really should just, and I think someone had asked a question, and the thing is like, is this just basically validating that I'm doing what I say and I'm saying what I do? And the answer is yes. You should be doing the fundamentals. You should be doing these things. The auditor is just calling the balls and strikes and make sure you're doing all the things you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sean. Thanks for answering that audience member's question. I thought that was a really clever question from the audience member. I'm glad you got it. And for telling people not just what they might be doing, but also what not to do. I think that's always also important. So, Sean, thank you so much for being with us today. And Alan, thank you so much for joining us today as well. I love your advice on CMMC 2.0 and compliance and some of the issues and challenges regarding that. I especially enjoyed what you said about the fundamentals as well as some of the specific ways to overcome the different issues. But it occurs to me, we only had a 1-hour show today and we covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. So I wanted to ask you, since I know you study this issue, if you have any final thoughts from your well of experience to maybe share or key considerations that you want to make sure that our audience really takes away from the discussion today.
Yeah, maybe really quickly. I think it's sort of helpful to remember that CMMC was specifically designed with the goal of addressing CUI confidentiality, right? While it spans a pretty wide aperture, it may not be sort of completely sufficient for a comprehensive cybersecurity program, right? It has a specific goal with a specific thing it addresses. And it certainly doesn't make it a point to address privacy. So if your organization's engaged in in privacy type issues, should sort of look at other things that you may have to do as well. And so to that end, while it's necessary to be CMMC compliant if you want to do DoD contracting, and it is an array of really good requirements and controls, you probably might be able to optimize your programming and your cybersecurity programming, get at things like governance and things like that by weaving these 171A requirements into broader frameworks like the cybersecurity framework or the cybersecurity joint privacy framework and things like that. So.
Yeah, no, excellent. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it, and glad that you were here with us today. Chad, it was great talking with you also on the show today. I'm really glad that you were here with us. I believe you said at some point you already assisted over like 200 organizations to get ready for CMMC 2.0 at this point. That's quite a lot. I mean, given that realm of experience and what you've been doing and what you've learned along the way, do you have any advice for contractors that are looking to get ready or move into CM 2.0 compliance? What should they do in order to have the success with this with as little disruption as possible?
Yeah, no, great question. I guess to add a little more meat to that question, a little more meat behind my answer, to pick up on what Alan said about the framework and it going to DOE. I know for a fact that it's gone to Department of Transformation or Transportation as well. I've seen some states issue very similar requirements. So I want to believe that there'll be some reciprocity. So if you invest in CMMC, you're probably going to get some reciprocity for future standards in FedCiv and state and local based government. But to the heart of your question, I really would say it's not a time to be a contrarian when you're approaching this. I've adopted technologies for me to be compliant around CMMC, around NIST that my customers are adopting. So if I look at the DoD, to Sean's point, Okta Fast Pass, it's authorized up to the IL4 mil cloud for government systems. So if it's good enough for the DoD, when I sit in front of an auditor, this will not be a brand new concept. I'm not explaining that the world isn't flat and that it's round. Everyone's going to agree to it. The same with Zscaler. Zscaler, when it comes to monitoring and securing traffic across the internet, again, it is a gold standard across the government. So when you leverage that, not only are you shifting the burden of some compliance because you're inheriting the controls from FedRAMP-based SaaS providers, but you're also talking to an auditor that's like, I've seen this 100 times. They understand Okta, they understand FastPass, they understand Zscaler, they understand Microsoft GCC High. You could go down the list. I'm not saying that you can 100% be compliant with an on-prem infrastructure, but you've shifted that burden directly on you and your team. And I don't even think it's going to be that cost effective. So really leveraging what your customer's doing, Zscaler, Okta, Microsoft, all of them, they have IL4, IL5, military clouds. We'll be operating in the IL2 FedRAMP moderate cloud, but really look to what's out there, what's been adopted across the industry, what's been adopted by your customers, and how can you make it work inside your company to propel you forward, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes perfect sense, Chad. I really appreciate that. And good point on the synergy that, if you get the 2.0 together, you might be able to then be ready for maybe some of the similar elements in like state and local governments. So great point to let people think about. And Jeff, that means that you get the last word on the panel today. First off, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed having you here and talking with you. Now, for those in our audience today who are working to get ready for 2.0, but they're kind of looking at this like really big mountain to climb to try to get there, do you have any advice for how they can get started? I mean, are there any really good places where they can maybe invest some time and effort and also probably a little bit of money, but really start to see some great returns and solid movement in their preparations for CMMC 2.0?
Yeah, I mean, great question. For me, it's actually start where you are. And I'll drill down a little bit more is don't get catfished. All right. Do not get catfished. Select the right capability. Sean highlighted it earlier, transparency. Not only, what is the vendor and the capability saying that they are mapped to, but not only from a high level white paper abstract, but to the actual control. If you read some of these vendor white papers, there's a lot of campaign promising and don't get catfished. Along with that is interoperability, that integration component with the other parts of your ecosystem. How is what you're looking to purchase playing well with other parts of your applications, your business? Another thing is modularity. What are you looking at fielding that's going to support you from a on-prem to a hybrid or even a cloud-first strategy? Does the capability, the CMMC capability support, how does it support your day-to-day, but also does it feed into your strategic needs? There was a great question about, hey, I can't, CMMC is DoD, what about DOE? For me, that called out your strategic need. You need something that's going to be able to support more than one framework or more than one strategy. And that's it. Thank you.
Excellent, Jeff. That was a perfect way to end the show. Thank you for being here. And thank you all to our amazing speakers today. This was a fascinating topic. I didn't know a lot about it beforehand, but now I learned a lot today. I'm sure our audience did as well. So thank you so much to our superstar speakers today, Alan, Jeff, Sean, and Chad, for joining us today to talk about this really critically important topic for our amazingly attentive audience. I really do appreciate you all taking the time to talk and chat with us about that. And thank you also to our amazing audience. You guys had some great questions today. We tried to get to a lot of them on the show. So thank you so much for your participation. And please also, if you enjoyed this show, be sure to check out our future FedInsider shows. We have a lot of really great content just like this coming up right around the corner. And I really hope to see you all there. So with that, let me turn things over now to FedInsider's Claudia Hosky for some final thoughts for our amazing audience today.
Thanks, John, and thanks again to our audience for your participation today. Training certificates will be emailed after the webinar ends. And remember to log back in the next day or two if you want to download a copy of our closed captioning transcripts. As John mentioned, we have many webinars in the works, so be sure to visit FedInsider.com so you can see what's coming up and register for multiple webinars at the same time. And while you're there, you can check out our podcast, Feds at the Edge. And with that, this is FedInsider signing off.